So I wanted to talk to you today about a couple of topics that are most important with regard to soil sampling. The first part is the physical sampling, extracting the cores, getting those off to the laboratory. And then the second part is making good use of those numbers and the results that we get back to make a really good interpretation and ultimately an excellent recommendation for growers to use. Obviously, getting a representative sample at the front end is most important for you to make your decisions, and understanding what you're sampling for is also of massive importance. Are you trying to find a problem, or are you just trying to understand nutrient issues in a field that hasn't been sampled for a while? A couple of examples might be you've just lasered a field, so you might be looking to reassess and start the process again. Or you may be looking at some sort of constraint or issue that has stemmed from the last crop. Farmers need to own that process because you're trying to get the best value out of the sampling process, which is then going to give you the best results to make some informed decisions. One consideration is where we take those samples from within the field. So we might randomise that, it might be a transect. In irrigation systems, we might confine those samples to head ditch, tail drain and midfield type locations. If we geo-reference those, they become repeatable or reference sites that we continue to monitor over time. But if we're looking to diagnose an issue, we might choose a good versus a bad area, for example. So a couple of different approaches there that we might take depending on the intent of what we're trying to find. So when we're physically taking those samples, the position not only in the field but also across the bed or the hill is also important. So we need to mix those positions up relative to the previous fertiliser bands that have been applied or relative to the system that that field is currently in, and if it's been cultivated, well mixed, etc. So the other thing to consider is the frequency of soil sampling. So depending on the intent or the purpose of the sampling program, it might be an annual thing or it might be as infrequent as once a rotation, and working through that with your advisor and your agronomist in terms of the sampling approach that you might take. As soil sample practitioners, when we're taking our samples, we just need to be really mindful of the soil conditions at the time. So if it's particularly wet, we can have some physical issues with regard to the way that the core presents within the tube and then how that core comes out of the tube. Obviously, using approved lubricants is important. And if we have wet and dry bands or dry parts of the profile, for example, we can get compaction, particularly with jackhammer type soil sampling systems. When we're thinking about the strategy and what samples we're going to take from where, depth is quite important, and the actual tests that we perform at those particular depths. So if we're diagnosing, we might be taking a greater number of analytes to try and understand the difference between a good or a bad area, for example. If we're just monitoring, we might have some specific targets in mind, our mobile nutrients like nitrogen and sulphur and boron, the things that are going to change across different seasons. Generally, we tend to do our full comprehensive work every 4 to 5 seasons, and then we tend to do the mobile nutrients annually or just prior to planting to understand what's changed since our last samples. We would confine those comprehensive samples largely to the topsoil, so a 0 to 30 sample in irrigation or a 0 to 10 and perhaps a 10 to 30 in the other systems to understand position and magnitude of nutrient at those two depths. So the other thing that we need to consider when we are sampling is contamination. So I'm standing out here in the sun today. If I had applied sunscreen and then handle soil that I've just collected, well, that may become a contaminant. That might blow our zinc numbers up, for example. So using galvanised equipment, climbing fences, opening gates, having filled our vehicle with diesel before we went out sampling, those sort of things are all potential contaminants that may show up in our soil sample numbers when we get our results back. The sample strategy needs to be a conversation with yourself and your advisor to understand our approach. So if it's for diagnosis, for example, our positions and the locations within the field that we take those samples from will be most or quite different than those where we're monitoring for long-term use or monitoring across a rotation, for example. So just a couple of different approaches there that when we need to understand that before we actually go out sampling.